An unexpected change has shaken the United States economy and the country's agricultural core. John Deere, the iconic company with nearly 2 centuries of history, has announced a reduction in its production on U.S. soil and the relocation of several jobs to Mexico. This decision has sparked major political and social upheaval, as it not only concerns iconic machinery, but also thousands of families who depend on these factories and a historic symbol of American agricultural power. At this delicate moment, President Donald Trump has reacted firmly, threatening to impose tariffs of up to 200% to force the company to keep jobs within the national territory. This measure marks a new episode in the heated debate over tariffs, global trade, and the direction of U.S. economic policy. The news has deeply impacted the communities of Iowa and Illinois, where plant closures have left more than 600 workers unemployed since 2024. Now, in 2025, nearly 300 more layoffs are added, directly affecting families, businesses, and streets that for generations have identified with the pride of producing under the John Deere emblem. Experts point out that the company is facing a perfect storm. Sales have dropped 18% in the second quarter. Crop prices are declining, high interest rates are slowing machinery purchases, and tariffs have cost the company $100 million just this quarter, with a projection of $500 million for next year. These figures justify the company's decision but do not quell the outrage of the population or politicians. Critics argue that this migration to Mexico reflects how international trade rules make it difficult to maintain jobs in the United States. However, other experts believe the root of the problem lies in an increasingly vulnerable agricultural model to global fluctuations, where farmers delay equipment purchases, depend on used machinery, and face emotional pressure beyond financial numbers. In this context, Trump bets on intensifying tariffs as a pressure tool, although some analysts warn this strategy could trigger trade retaliation and further increase machinery costs, harming the very farmers it seeks to protect. The controversy is not limited to numbers, as Iowa legislators have proposed that companies closing plants return the tax benefits they received from the state, opening an ethical debate about corporate loyalty and social responsibility. For many, the John Deere crisis reflects current dilemmas in economic policy: protect jobs at any cost or adapt to global market rules. This crossroads places the United States at the center of a crucial debate about the sustainability of the national production model. While headlines announce closures and promise $20 billion in investments over the next decade, the question workers, farmers, and communities ask is clear: can such aggressive tariff policies really stop job losses? Or will they only accelerate tensions in the global economy? The controversy goes beyond layoffs and threats of new tariffs, because what is at stake with John Deere is a clear example of how international trade tensions affect the daily lives of Americans. From farms to small towns in the Midwest, the company, which has already moved production lines of small loaders to Mexico with plans for 2026, has become the focus of intense political debate. President Trump insists that a 200% tariff on imported machinery is the only way to force companies to keep operations on U.S. soil. This argument ignites passions between those who defend national, industrial identity and those who fear. Such strict tariff policies could raise prices and harm farmers. Specialists indicate that farmers are trapped in a complicated cycle: high interest rates that increase credit costs, low crop prices that reduce income, and now the threat of a 2 to 4% increase in equipment costs for 2026 due to tariffs. All this happens in a context where there is already a shortage of spare parts, delays in repairs, and a rising used machinery market, generating frustration and insecurity that cannot be measured only by numbers. According to analysts, John Deere seeks to benefit from relief under the USMCA treaty to mitigate costs, while renegotiating contracts, redefining its global production map, and promising to invest $20 billion over the next 10 years, including new plants in North Carolina and Missouri. Although these projects appear promising on paper, doubts persist about their viability in such a volatile scenario. Critics argue that these investments will not solve the immediate problem of affected communities because while mega projects are announced for the future, today more than 18,000 workers in Iowa and nearby states have lost their jobs, causing a cultural shock in regions that for generations took pride in working in factories symbolizing the strength of Made in America. This situation has become an electoral issue and a battleground between those who defend job protection and those who fear it, may unleash new trade disputes, affecting not only Mexico but also Canada, Europe, and Asia, with possible similar responses. Some observers warn that the line between protecting the domestic economy and isolating the country from global dynamics is very thin. What is at stake is not just John Deere's future, but the credibility of U.S. economic policy at a time of stronger global interdependence than ever. Meanwhile, in cities like Ankini, Ottumwa, and others affected, the conversation revolves around a fundamental question. Is it worth paying more to protect national production? Or will the social cost of losing jobs be even greater if companies continue to relocate? The situation of John Deere and President Trump's reaction have become a clear example of how trade tensions impact not only macroeconomic statistics but the real lives of people who see their future filled with uncertainty. Behind each layoff announcement are families adjusting budgets, communities seeing their local businesses close, and farmers wondering if they can maintain production next year. This scenario opens a much broader debate about the direction of tariff policy in the United States. While Trump argues that 200% tariffs are a legitimate tool to protect jobs and strengthen the domestic economy, some experts warn these measures could have the opposite effect, raising not only agricultural machinery costs but also food and basic goods prices that depend on global supply chains. Here arises a crucial point. U.S. agriculture heavily depends on exports, and when other countries respond with retaliations, farmers lose key markets, worsening the crisis caused by low crop prices. According to analysts, John Deere estimates tariffs will cost $500 million in 2025, a figure that forces a complete redesign of its global strategy. Many analysts wonder whether losses will be absorbed by the company itself, passed on to consumers, or covered by government subsidies. Amid this controversy, Trump has used the situation to strengthen his rhetoric defending the national industry, stating that companies abandoning American workers must pay a high price. This stance receives support among his followers but also raises concerns in business sectors worried about the impact on competitiveness. The discussion about U.S. tariffs and global trade has ceased to be an abstract topic of international diplomacy and has become a tangible reality, visible in closed factories, stalled dealership inventories, and farmers postponing investments. This scenario fuels the perception that U.S. economic policy is entering uncertain territory. Some critics argue that moving production to Mexico is not an act of betrayal, but a logical response to global market dynamics, where labor and operating costs are lower. However, for many ordinary citizens, this explanation sounds distant and cold, as what truly matters is that jobs vanish in their communities and the future becomes uncertain. For its part, John Deere asserts that the $20 billion investment planned for the next decade demonstrates its commitment to the country, and that modernizing plants in Iowa, Missouri, and North Carolina will help create new jobs, though it is still unclear if these will offset immediate losses. Tensions also extend into the political realm, as state legislators have proposed laws that would require companies like John Deere to return tax credits if they close factories, provoking a direct clash between the private sector and local authorities. Specialists warn that these measures could increase investor distrust and complicate relations between states and corporations, although others see them as a legitimate attempt to hold companies accountable for the benefits they have received. In this complex context, much more than a brand or factory is at stake. It concerns the model the United States wants to adopt to position itself in the global economy. The question is whether it will be a country willing to face global trade with protectionist barriers or an actor seeking to adapt and negotiate within a system of interdependence. The truth is that the decisions made now regarding John Deere could set a crucial precedent for other U.S. companies facing similar dilemmas, from the automotive to the technology industry. The inevitable question arises: will the chosen path lead to an industrial rebirth or a new wave of international conflicts that will exert even more pressure on the global economy? While farmers hope for fairer prices and workers long for job stability, the tension between protecting local interests and competing in the global market becomes the most challenging crossroads in current economic policy. At this point, John Deere's story has ceased to be just a business matter and has become a symbol of the deep tensions that the United States is experiencing in an increasingly interconnected and competitive world. Plant closures, layoffs in states like Iowa and Illinois, production migration to Mexico, and the threat of 200% tariffs are not just numbers on a financial statement, but a living reflection of how economic policies, global trade dynamics, and corporate decisions affect the daily lives of millions. For some citizens, Trump's response represents a legitimate defense of the national industry, a strong message that the government will not allow companies to move jobs abroad without consequences. However, for others, this strategy raises fears of triggering an escalation of trade wars that could isolate the country and unleash a domino effect in the global economy, affecting prices, export markets, and diplomatic relations. According to experts, the key will be the management in the coming months, as John Deere seeks relief under the USMCA and negotiates with suppliers to mitigate costs, while the administration must decide whether aggressive tariffs become a permanent pressure tool or if there is room for a more flexible approach that maintains competitiveness without provoking international retaliation. Observers warn that the challenge is not only economic but also psychological and cultural, as in cities where the green and yellow logo was once a source of community pride, a sense of betrayal and abandonment now prevails. A blow to collective identity that cannot be repaired by promises of future investments alone. Meanwhile, farmers face a complex dilemma: continue trusting that U.S. machinery will remain accessible and reliable, or seek alternatives from global suppliers, which would open an unexpected chapter in the history of American agriculture. Critics argue that this tension tests the credibility of current economic policy because if the government manages to stop job losses without unsustainably raising prices, the narrative that protectionism can lead to recovery will be strengthened. But if the result is higher costs and loss of international markets, the strategy could backfire on its defenders. The big unknown is how the rest of the world will react, as past measures of this nature provoked swift responses from trading partners who did not hesitate to impose their own tariffs. This could affect not only the agricultural sector but also key industries like automotive, construction, and technology. In this context, John Deere becomes a barometer for something much larger: the United States' ability to navigate a global interdependent scenario where every decision has direct consequences for the stability of the world economy. What began as a business announcement has transformed into a political and social turning point, posing essential questions for all citizens. Should the United States intensify its bet on tariffs as a national protective shield, even if that increases international tensions and domestic prices? Or is it time to rethink a more open strategy that combines job defense with integration into global trade? The situation is not simple, and perhaps that is why the John Deere crisis has become a symbol of the decisive moment the country is going through. It is a challenge that will impact not only current farmers and workers, but also shape the path the nation will take in the coming years. Now, the reflection is in your hands. Do you believe that Trump's tariff policy will preserve jobs and strengthen the U.S. economy? Or do you think it will trigger a series of conflicts that will ultimately harm those it tries to protect even more?